A new look to Night Times Now on BBC Two as we showcase some of the issues and debates covered by our colleagues on BBC Parliament.
Secretary David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought it would be useful for the House to be brought up to date on the working of my department after the referendum of the 23rd of June. Our instructions from the British people are clear. Britain is leaving the European Union. The mandate for that course is overwhelming. The referendum of June the 23rd delivered a bigger vote for Brexit than that won by any UK government in history. It's a national mandate, and this government is determined to deliver it in the national interest. And the Prime Minister has made clear there will be no attempt to stay in the EU by the back door, no attempt to delay, frustrate or thwart the will of the British people, no attempt to engineer a second referendum. Because some people didn't like the first answer. The people have spoken in a referendum offered to them by this government and confirmed by Parliament, by all of us, on both sides of the argument, and we must all respect it. That's a simple matter of democratic politics. Now, naturally, people want to know what Brexit will mean. Simply, it means leaving the European Union. So we will decide on our borders, our laws, and the taxpayers' money. It means getting the best deal for Britain, one that's unique to Britain, and not an off-the-shelf solution. This must mean controls on the numbers of people who come to Britain from Europe, but also a positive outcome for those who wish to trade in goods and services. This is a historic and positive moment for our nation. Brexit's not about making the best of a bad job. It's about seizing a huge and exciting opportunity that will flow from a new place for Britain in the world. There'll be new freedoms, new opportunities, new horizons for our country. And we can get the right trade policy for the UK. We can create a more dynamic economy, a beacon for free trade across the world. We want to make sure our regulatory environment helps rather than hinders businesses and workers. We can create an immigration system that allows us to control numbers and encourage the brightest and best to come to this country. But I want to be clear to our European friends and allies. We do not see Brexit as ending our relationship with Europe. It's about starting a new one. We want to maintain or even strengthen our cooperation on security and defence. It's in the interest of both the UK and the European Union that we have the freest possible trading relationship. We want a strong European Union succeeding economically and politically, working with Britain in many areas of common interest. So we should all approach the negotiations that come about our exit with a sense of mutual respect and cooperation. Now, I know the House will want to be updated about the work of the department. It's a privilege to have been asked to lead it by the Prime Minister, and the challenge we face is exciting and considerable. It will require significant expertise and a consistent approach. Negotiating with the EU has to be got right, and we are going to take the time to get it right. And we'll strive to build a national consensus around our approach. Now, we start from a position of economic strength. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, there will be challenges ahead. But our economy is robust, thanks in no small part to the work of my right honourable friend, the member for Tatton. The latest data suggest our manufacturing and service industries and consumer confidence are all strong, contrary to some of the predictions earlier. Businesses are putting their faith and their money into this country. Over the summer, SoftBank, GlaxoSmithKline, Siemens all confirmed that they will make major investments in the UK. Countries including Australia have already made clear their desire to proceed quickly with a new trade deal for the UK. As other nations see advantages to them, I am confident they will want to prioritise deals with the UK too. But we are not complacent. Our task, Mr. Speaker, is to build on this success and strength and negotiate a deal for exiting the European Union that's in the interest of the entire nation. Now, as I have already indicated, securing a deal that's in our national interest does not and must not mean turning our back on Europe. To do so would not be in our interest, nor Europe's. So we'll work hard to help establish a future relationship between the EU and the UK that's dynamic, constructive and healthy. We want a steadfast and successful European Union after we depart. And so, as we proceed, we will be guided by some clear principles. First, as I said, we wish to build a national consensus around our position. Second, we'll always put the national interest first. We will always act in good faith towards our European partners. Third, wherever possible, we'll try to minimise any uncertainty that change can inevitably bring. And fourthly, we will crucially, by the end of this process, have left the European Union and put the sovereignty and supremacy of this Parliament beyond doubt. The first formal step of the process of leaving the European Union is to invoke Article 50, which will start 2 years of negotiations. Let me briefly update the House on how the machinery of government will support our efforts and the next steps we'll take. First, responsibilities. The Prime Minister will lead the UK's exit negotiations and will be supported on a day-to-day basis by my department. We'll work closely with all government departments to develop our objectives and to negotiate new relations with the EU and the rest of the world. Supporting me is a first-class ministerial team and some of the brightest and best in Whitehall who want to engage in this national endeavour. The department now has over 180 staff in London, plus the expertise over 120 officials in Brussels. And we're still growing rapidly with the first-class support from other departments. As for the next steps, the department's task is clear. We are undertaking 2 broad areas of work. First, given we're determined to build that national consensus, we're going to listen and talk to as many organisations, companies and institutions as possible, from the large PLCs to small businesses, from the devolved administrations through to councils, local government associations and major metropolitan bodies. We are already fully engaged with the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to ensure a UK-wide approach to our negotiations. The Prime Minister met the First Minister of Scotland and Wales and the First Minister and Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland in July. And last week I visited Northern Ireland for meetings with its political leaders, where I reiterated our determination that there will be no return to the hard borders of the past. I'll visit Scotland and Wales soon. My ministerial colleagues and I have also discussed the next steps of a range of organisations. My first meeting was with the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress, followed by key business groups, representatives of universities and charitable sectors, and farming and fisheries organisations. But this is just the start. In the weeks ahead, we'll speak to as many other firms, organisations and bodies as possible. Research institutes, regional, national groups and businesses up and down the country to establish their priorities and the opportunities for the whole of the UK. As part of this exercise, I can announce we'll be holding roundtables with stakeholders in a series of sectors to ensure all views to be reflected in our analysis for the options of the UK.
Order. The right honourable gentleman just resume his seat for a minute. There's quite a lot of unseemly, dare I say it, somewhat unstatesmanlike noise from a sedentary position. Somebody muttering, too long. It's not too long at all, the right honourable gentleman. It's perfectly in order. And let me just remind the House that it's always been my practice to facilitate the fullest and most extensive interrogation of the relevant minister. And that will happen today. Everybody will have his or her opportunity. But it would be a good thing if people would listen respectfully. If they can manage a beaming countenance reminiscent of that of the Foreign Secretary, that will be a bonus, but it is not obligatory. Secretary of State.
Those stakeholders include broadcast, aviation, energy, financial services, automotive and others. I'll also engage with the Member States. I'm beginning this with a visit to Dublin this week. I'm working particularly closely with the Foreign Secretary and Secretary of State for International Trade. They've been meeting counterparts in Washington, Brussels, Delhi and the capitals of other EU states. Whilst we do this, My officials, supported by officials across government, are carrying out a programme of sectoral analysis and regulatory analysis which will identify the key factors for some 50 sectors of British business. And that's extremely important for the House to understand. We're building a detailed understanding of how the withdrawal from the EU will affect the domestic policies to seize the opportunities and ensure a smooth process of exit. Now, Mr. Speaker, the referendum result was a clear sign that the majority of the British people want to see Parliament's sovereignty strengthened. And so throughout this process, Parliament will be regularly informed, updated and engaged. Finally, we are determined to ensure that people have as much stability and certainty in the period leading up to our departure from the EU. Until we leave the European Union, we must respect the laws and obligations that membership requires of us. We also want to ensure certainty when it comes to public funding. The Chancellor has confirmed that structural and investment fund projects signed before the autumn statement and research and innovation projects financed by the European Commission granted before we leave the EU will be underwritten by the Treasury after we leave. Agriculture is a vital part of the economy, and the government will match the current level of annual payments that the sector receives through the direct payment scheme until 2020, again providing certainty. In terms of the position of EU nationals in the UK, the Prime Minister has been clear she is determined to protect the status of EU nationals already living here, and the only circumstances in which that would not be possible is if the British citizens' rights in European member states were not protected in return, something I frankly find very hard to imagine. I'm confident together we'll be able to deliver on what the country asked us to do through the referendum. I'm greatly encouraged by the national mood. Most of those who I've met who wanted to remain have accepted the result and now want to make a success of the course Britain has chosen. Indeed, organisations and individuals I have met already that back the Remain campaign now want to be engaged in the process of exit and are identifying positive changes that will flow from it as well as the challenges. I want us all to come together as one nation to get the best deal for Britain. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we are confident of negotiating a new position that will mean this country flourishing outside the European Union while keeping its members as friends, allies and trading partners. We will leave the European Union, but we will not...
Oh, hold on. The Honourable Member for Perth and North Perthshire is an aspiring statesman. His aspiration may be a little way from fulfilment, but I want to hear the Secretary of State's peroration. Secretary of State.
It's an aspiration of very long standing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we are confident of negotiating a position that will mean this country flourishing outside the EU, keeping its members as our friends, our allies and our trading partners. We will leave the European Union, but we will not turn our back on Europe. We will embrace the opportunities and freedoms that will open up for Britain. We will deliver on the national mandate for Brexit, and we will deliver it in the national interest.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by welcoming the Secretary of State to his new role. It's been 8 years since his last appearance at the Dispatch Box. Back then, I believe his last words were, "You have to answer." So let's hope that he'll be giving us some answers today. And can I also welcome his attitude, as expressed today, that he will be talking to everybody and listening to everyone. Could I give him some advice? Perhaps he should start by putting a telephone number on his website. It's been a little bit difficult tracking his department down. So it would be nice if he could begin by being a little bit more out later. But some of the answers that we would expect, Mr. Speaker, because the spin before today's statement was so much promise. We heard that we were going to hear what the government's strategy for Brexit was. But what we've heard instead hasn't been a strategy, it hasn't been a thought-out plan, it's just been more empty platitudes from a government that just continues to make it up as it goes along. So last night we had the Prime Minister seemingly on a plane, it's seemingly, well, telling us at least what she wasn't going to be doing. So it seems that we're not going to have a points-based immigration system, and we're not going to have any extra money for the NHS, and we're not going to have any reduction in VAT on fuel. But what we haven't been told is what they are going to do. When are they going to tell us how they're going to deliver, for example, free trade for British businesses whilst also imposing immigration controls, let alone how they're going to address the red lines that Labour's demanded on protection of workers' rights and guarantees for EU citizens? The Secretary of State says that he wants to present a positive vision of Britain post-Brexit. But unless he can tell us what deal they're working towards, how they plan to achieve it, and whether other member states will accept it, his positive vision is just a pipe dream. It is just rhetoric. Can I remind the Secretary of State of what he said 2 months ago? He said this: the negotiating strategy has to be properly designed, and there has to be serious consultation before it's done. And this is one of the reasons for taking a little time before triggering Article 50. Well, absolutely, a little time before triggering Article 50. But where is it? Where is the negotiating strategy? What serious consultation has taken place with other member states? And in the absence of either, why are the government pushing ahead with Article 50? What has happened since July? What is the plan? Can I remind the House of what the Foreign Affairs Select Committee said in July about the previous government? The previous government's considered view not to instruct key departments to plan for the possibility of a leave vote amounted to gross negligence. And what do we have to say, therefore, about the current government when 2 months later we are no further forward? Surely all we can say is this: that when it comes to planning for Brexit, they have gone from gross negligence to rank incompetence. And when we see the warnings to Britain from Japan and others at the G20, when we see investment from companies like Nissan put under threat, it is British workers who are going to be paying the price for this government's incompetence. This morning, the Japanese ambassador, speaking on the Today programme, said something that was as honest as it was deadly. He said this: the problem that we see is not to have a very well thought through consideration before you start negotiation. Absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, absolutely right. Are the government rushing to start negotiation? Yes. Have they got a well thought out plan for that negotiation? No. So finally, Mr. Speaker, I must say this. The Secretary of State has won plaudits in the past for his principled stance around issues such as parliamentary sovereignty, and indeed he's talked about it again today, about the importance of parliamentary sovereignty. He's talked about democratic rights, he's talked about the rule of law, so surely he cannot think that it's right that Article 50 should be triggered by royal prerogative. And as the former Attorney General, his friend and mine, the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield, has said, the idea that a government could take a decision of such massive importance without parliamentary approval seems to me to be extremely far-fetched. Well, I don't think it's far-fetched. I think it's just plain wrong. And I think that if the Secretary of State was still on the backbenches, he would agree with me. Mr. Speaker, when there is no evidence of sound planning by this government, no detail whatsoever on the deal that they want to strike, no strategy for achieving that deal, or the reasons for pushing it through, Parliament must have more of a say on those issues. We must have more than simply a say. We must have a vote.
Secretary of State.
That was it. All right. I thank the Honourable Lady for her welcome. As is, I suspect, very common in the position of people entering Cabinet, I have had a very large number of congratulatory emails and telegrams. The best one actually was the shortest. It said, "Many congratulations, I now believe in the resurrection." But let me deal with the measures that she has raised. She accuses, the Labour Party accuses us of rank incompetence. The Labour Party. Yeah? The Prime Minister, when she was on her trip to China, described her approach to complex problems, and this is certainly a complex problem. She described it as collect the data and analyse it, make your judgment, make your decision, and implement it. The Labour Party clearly does it the other way round. Indeed, the Americans have a phrase for the way that they approach these things, not looking at the problem, not looking at the issue, not looking at the data. They call it load, fire, aim. Now, that might be very appropriate for the circular firing squad that's the Labour Party, but it's not appropriate to running the national interest. Now, she raised the issue of the points-based immigration system. What the Prime Minister said in China was very clear. What she wants is a results-based immigration system, one that actually delivers an outcome the British people voted for, and that's what she will be delivering at the end of this. She mentioned the Japanese ambassador. The Japanese ambassador this morning said, I have to do it from memory, but he said something to the effect that he had not met a company that did not think Britain was the best place in Europe to have its business, not one, and that he admired the Prime Minister's approach to this negotiation. So I think she should pick her quotes a little more carefully. But let me come to the central point, if there was a point, in what she had to say.
There wasn't.
Article 50. Before we entered onto this course, there was a bill that went through this House, a referendum bill. It was voted for 6-1 in this House. She voted for it. She voted for it. Now, what did it say? It was presented by the Foreign Secretary at the time, and he said, we are giving the British people the decision to make on this. Not advice, not consultation, the decision. And what she is trying to wrap up in a pseudo-democratic masquerade is the most anti-democratic proposal I have heard for some time. She wants to deny the will of the British people, and up with that we will not put.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all start by welcoming my right honourable friend's return to the front bench. As someone who's recently left it voluntarily, I have to tell him, I unreservedly welcome him, and I also welcome his incredibly optimistic tone to the whole idea of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, forging a new relationship with the rest of the world. And on the specifics of the statement, can I just ask him, well, actually, the one specific, which is we are leaving the European Union. So on that specific, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I might press my right honourable friend. In the media today, we've had a certain amount of speculation about what the details are of actually what that means in terms of controlling our borders. Can I ask him, when he gets to the dispatch box, to confirm to us that in leaving the European Union, the number one thing that is absolutely not negotiable is that this United Kingdom will take control of its borders and the laws that are relevant to that, and that is not negotiable for any other deal.
Secretary of State.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his right honourable gentleman for his question. I'll say two things. The first thing is that in the referendum that we've just had, the biggest mandate ever given to a British government, a clear, large part of it was the question of immigration. And the Prime Minister has made it very plain that the current status of immigration cannot go on, and we will bring it to an end as a part of this process.
Mr. Stephen Gethin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I start by welcoming the Secretary of State to his new position and congratulating him? Can I continue by asking him, was that it? You've had all summer, Secretary of State. It has to be said, it is a mark of an irresponsible government, just as it was a mark of an irresponsible Leave campaign that we know nothing more about the phrase that Brexit means Brexit. Nothing more. Creating huge levels of uncertainty for our universities, research institutions who need some certainty beyond 2020, food and drink producers, EU nationals who have made this country their home and deserve much better. What reassurances can the Secretary of State give them? Because he's given them precious little from that statement today. And the actions of that government stand in stark contrast to those of the Scottish Government, who have reached out to EU nationals, who have set out clear action, including setting up an expert group, £100 million in economic stimulus, with more to come tomorrow in a programme for government. The Secretary of State was responsible for a Leave campaign that had no plans, zero Zilch. All that stood in stark contrast to a 670-page white paper that the Scottish Government produced ahead of the independence referendum. Does he regret not having any more plans, especially now that we have the Prime Minister slapping down some of their ideas and the Foreign Secretary referring to access to the single market? Does he regret that blank piece of paper, Mr. Speaker?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm tempted to say, is that it again? I mean, the simple truth is that the honourable gentleman talked about a 670-page white paper for a Scottish referendum, which I'll remind him they lost. Yeah? And they would still lose today. Because after the Brexit referendum, what do we see? Do the Scottish people want another referendum? No, they don't. Would they vote to leave? No, they wouldn't. And I think that's all I need to say to the honourable gentleman.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I understand my right honourable friend's difficulties, and I congratulate him on not rushing anything, and I encourage him to take as long with his colleagues as he possibly can in working out a policy, and I look forward to hearing from again when the government have found something they can agree on which indicates what Brexit actually means. But meanwhile, on a more positive note, I don't recall my right honourable friend taking part in any of the ill-informed and sometimes prejudiced attacks on immigrants and foreigners living and working in this country. So can he confirm to me that he agrees with me that although some anti-foreigner rhetoric may have added a few votes that may have tilted the Leave campaign into a majority, he agrees with me that the majority of the public are not hostile to other Europeans living and working in this country, so long as they respect our laws and our customs. So will he confirm the government will not needlessly sacrifice our access to a free market to 500 people or our other trade and economic cooperations with our European allies just to demonstrate that we're turning away foreigners from this country who employers wish to employ to fill shortages of skills or the unwillingness of English people to fill vacancies in various parts of our economy?
Stay.
Well, my right honourable friend and I have debated this matter, I think, for probably nearly 30 years. Let me say this on the question of anti-foreigner rhetoric. I agree with him entirely that the sort of unpleasantness that sometimes has arisen out of this is to be wholly condemned. Wholly condemned. And I certainly join him in condemning that rhetoric. The issue, however, which he then moves on to, the question of immigration, I do not think that when people are concerned about immigration, it is xenophobia, necessarily. Right. There are economic, social and other pressures that lead to people being concerned about immigration. Neither do I think that it is a simple trade-off, that an immigration control system which suits our country is necessarily one that will preclude a good trade relationship with the European Union. Trade relationships are beneficial to both sides. We should not need to make a policy purchase in order to get such a relationship. So, whilst I agree with his original proposal, I don't agree with his conclusion.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will know that the business of his department will be the most important issue facing our country for decades, and it is hugely important that we get the best deal for Britain outside the European Union. No one expects him to have worked out all of the answers yet, but we do expect him to be able to set out the outline of some kind of plan, and today we have heard nothing on that. So let me ask him even just one specific question. Have they even looked, for example, at what the Home Affairs issues will be in the negotiations, and has he decided whether or not Britain will be staying in Europol, a decision that will have to be made this year, not in many years to come? Has he decided, will we be in Europol, yes or no?
Secretary of State.
The Honourable Lady was an eminent Cabinet member and indeed an eminent front bench member and Shadow Home Secretary. So I take her question extremely seriously, as she does this issue. The simple question is that the Justice and Home Affairs stream, the whole Justice and Home Affairs stream, is being assessed exactly as we speak. And the aim is to preserve the relationship with the European Union on security matters as best we can. She will remember that last year there was a decision which was made which laid aside about 100 measures which we didn't want to be a part of, but kept some, including the European arrest warrant and one or two others, controversially. She will remember that. So yes, of course, we're across that, and of course we are aiming to maintain that, and that's the answer.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
Can I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend on his return to the government front bench after an unfortunate hiatus of some 20 years. Is it not absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that my right honourable friend has both the skills and the experience for the extremely difficult job which lies ahead? And surely, Mr. Speaker, the whole House will wish him every success as he charts those extremely difficult shows.
I must admit I didn't hear the question. and flattering as it is, I don't intend to pay a fee for it either.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
Mr. Speaker, we learnt more from the Prime Minister's briefing of journalists in China of substance than we had in that 15 minutes about stakeholders and round tables. So could the Secretary of State please confirm that the points-based immigration system, the cut in VAT on fuel, and the £250 million extra every week for the NHS, the three main promises of the Leave campaign, now lie in tatters?
Hear, hear. State.
The task of my department is to deliver on three things. The British people in the referendum voted for return to Parliament of control of their laws, control of our money, and control of our borders. And that's what my department will do. What happens then is down to the government and Parliament. But let me just deal with one aspect of what he said, the points-based immigration system. What the Prime Minister said in China was very clear. She was concerned that a points-based system was actually too open-ended, that it did not actually put a control on the number of people coming to the UK. And therefore she wanted something which sounded like it would be more rigorous, not less.
Mr. John Redwood.
47 countries have free trade agreements with the EU without accepting any EU control over migration in their countries or accepting any contributions to the EU. Will my right honourable friend confirm that taking back control cannot be negotiated with the French, Germans and the others? We take back control of those matters and we negotiate, if they wish, over trade. And would he further confirm that the French and German governments have indicated not at all that they wish to impose any tariffs on their very profitable trade with us because they don't believe in self-harm?
Well, that last point goes really to the heart of the question, because free trade is not something which is a gift from one country to another. It's something which is mutually beneficial. And I fully expect that when we come to do our negotiation with the European Union, we will see them recognising France, Germany, all of them, every single one has a manufacturing surplus delivered to us. We have a service surplus the other way, typically. And I expect that we will both gain from the free trade agreement that comes out of that negotiation.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State to his place and also welcome his statement today and the visit that he made recently to Northern Ireland, where he met the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister and others. Can he give us a reassurance that as we seek to move forward and make a success of Brexit for the whole of the United Kingdom, which is what the British people in its entirety have voted for, all parts of it, can he reassure me, as a result of this national vote, and all members of the United Kingdom had an equal vote in that and have voted overwhelmingly to come out of the European Union, can the Secretary of State make it clear that he will work with ministers in Northern Ireland very, very closely, but not just at ministerial level, but that officials within his department will work very closely with officials in the Executive Office, the DFP and the Department of the Economy and others to ensure we make a success of this project.
Well, I can tell the right honourable gentleman that that's already happening, that the officials in my department and indeed other Whitehall departments are working with officials in the Northern Ireland office to proceed on what will be actually one of the more difficult elements of the negotiation, because we do have to deal with the issue of the border and keeping it open and not returning to the times of the recent past. But I also agree with him in with some depth in his statement that this is a national decision. A whole British nation, a whole United Kingdom nation that has decided on this. And whilst we will seek, and I look at the Scottish Nationalist benches when I'm saying this, whilst we will seek to meet and protect the interests of every part of the United Kingdom, that does not mean that any part of it will have a veto on it, least of all for partisan reasons.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
I welcome my right honourable friend to his responsibilities and further welcome his agreement to come before the Foreign Affairs Committee next week in order to provide further follow-up to this statement. Does he share my assessment that there is a key foreign security and defence interest for our 27 European Union partners in finding continuing engagement with the United Kingdom after Brexit?
My right honourable friend, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, is absolutely right, and indeed this is fundamental to one of the points I was making in the course of my earlier remarks. There is a very strong security, foreign affairs, foreign policy, environmental, a whole series of relationships that will continue to apply long after we have left the European Union, to the benefit of both the European Union and the United Kingdom.
Kate Hoey.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome most warmly the Minister to his new position, and I know that millions of Labour voters and supporters across the country who voted to leave will be pleased that there is someone in this position who genuinely wants to get out of the European Union. Can I just ask him to confirm that there is a real difference between wanting to be members of the single market and wanting to have access to the single market, and that some of the Remainers should really learn that?
The right honourable lady is right, and of course the access to the single market is actually not really up for grabs. It's there for everybody. There are many countries actually outside the European Union that do a better job, frankly, of exporting the single market than we do, even without a trade arrangement. So, of course, we want to have access to the single market, and we don't need to be a member of it to do it. Indeed, it's being a member of it that's caused some of the problems of sovereignty that this referendum was driven by.
Sir William Cash.
Congratulations, first of all, to my right honourable friend on his appointment. Will he confirm that the vote to leave requires the repeal of the European Communities Act 1972, and will the government bring in such a bill as soon as reasonably possible?
The aspects of the European Union European Communities Act 1972 that are required to be repealed, and those aspects of the acquis communautaire that need to be carried into British law are a very important joint set of issues that have to be decided. And once we've got to the point of deciding what we need to do there, we will come back to the House at the first possible opportunity.
Mr. Christopher Leslie.
Don't we need more specifics, really, from the Secretary of State? Don't we need to know, for example, that we can be building those new relationships and not just waiting until after the divorce proceedings finish? When Jean-Claude Juncker this weekend was saying that he doesn't like the idea of negotiating trade arrangements, wouldn't that just leave us in limbo? It's essential that we have the ability to get on with building those new relationships now. That means dealing with the Brexit issue at the same time, in parallel, as making sure that we forge those new relationships. We have to have them together, not one after the other. How is he going to secure that?
The Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. I mean, and indeed, the suggestion from the Commission that it's somehow illegal for my right honourable friend to go and talk to ministers in India or Canada or Australia or wherever it is that he's going to next is somewhat ridiculous. The only thing they can say in legal terms is that we cannot bring into force an agreement until after we leave. That's perfectly fair, that's perfectly proper, that's what the laws of the European Union are. And he can take it as read that that's what we are doing, that we are looking to make sure that we have the fastest transition to our other opportunities that I mentioned as fast as possible after Brexit concludes. Similarly, on the other front, there have been suggestions that somehow we can't talk about the trade arrangement with Europe until Article 50's process is concluded and we're outside the European Union. That too is nonsense. And I've looked very carefully at several different versions in different languages of Article 50. They all refer to effectively the parallel negotiation which will need to take place. So you can take it as read that on both those counts he's right, and on both those counts we are pursuing the matter.
Mr. Owen Paterson.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my honourable friend on his appointment and wish him well in his historic task. Mr. Speaker, many industries, many everyday activities depend on European regulation. There is some uncertainty being stirred up about the future of this law. Further to his reply to my honourable friend, the chairman of the Select Committee, European Affairs Select Committee, can he confirm that the government is going about work establishing the entire corpus of European law, establishing all the detail of the acquis communautaire, and following the path set by countries such as India and Australia, who, when they took on full independence, converted the whole of British law into their national law, and then in subsequent years went through it, repealed, filled it, or improved upon it?
Yes, my right honourable friend makes a very good point, and it's one of the reasons this process is taking some time, because the legal interactions of these elements of the acquis communautaire and British law are not straightforward. My initial starting position was we would put them all into the law and take it from there. It doesn't quite work like that, and that's why it's taking a little while. But you can be quite sure that my legal section and the Whitehall lawyers are on that issue as we speak, and we'll come up with a conclusion as quickly as we can. And when they do, I will tell the House what their conclusion is.
Dr. Ailey Whiteford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's fishing communities were due to receive over €100 million in European Maritime and Fisheries Fund support between now and 2023. The Secretary of State today has committed to support our agricultural communities by guaranteeing CAP funding will be matched until 2020. Will he make a similar commitment to our fishing communities today to honour funding to the MMF in the current funding round?
Hear, hear.
Sadly, I didn't make the commitment. The Chancellor made the commitment, well, with great respect, it isn't to me to actually make commitments on behalf of the Treasury. But what I will say to her is this: he made the commitment. If she reads, and we'll put a copy of the letter in the library, of which he laid out the underpinning of the CAP and the underpinning of structural funds and science funds and so on. And he made the point very clearly that this was effectively his decision until the autumn statement. Right? So what I would say to her, and I will reflect it to him myself, is what she has said, so that before the autumn statement he is at least aware of her concerns. Yeah?
Mr. Peter Lilly.
One of the legitimate concerns of many Remain voters, which those of us on the Leave side can well understand, was a fear that an unduly long period of uncertainty while negotiations were going on would be damaging for the British economy. Could my right honourable friend therefore confirm that it will be his priority to complete this process as soon as possible, that the 2 years limit set down in Article 50 is an arbitrary maximum, not a necessary minimum, and that most countries which have obtained their independence or left a political union, like India, or Canada, or Australia, or Czech and Slovak republics, have done so in far less than 2 years?
I defer to his knowledge of history on the other countries. What I will say to him is this: the Prime Minister has said that we will not trigger Article 50 until the new year. The reason for that is not unnecessary delay or wasting of time. The reason for that is to make sure that we get all of the decisions absolutely right. He's heard in the last few minutes about some of the complexities involved in the acquis communautaire alone. So what we will do is we will trigger Article 50 as soon as is reasonably possible. I would rather be a month late and get it right than be a month early and get it wrong. But nevertheless, that's what we will do, and we will do so as expeditiously as possible. The Prime Minister again has said in very clear terms that she thinks the British people expect us to get on with this.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, unravelling 40 years of close cooperation within the European Union with 27 nation states now is, as the Right Honourable Gentleman is learning, if he didn't know before, a very complex issue. Does he intend to give the House some ongoing view of how that is going? And can you give some assurance on such issues as workers' rights, equal pay for work of equal value? Will we still be keeping that? Will the EU laws which guarantee our pension payments as if they are deferred wages still be recognised by this House? And he talks about the sovereignty of Parliament. Will he give this Parliament much more of a say on the deal that is done? And is his government intending to give the British people a say on the deal when it's finally done?
He loves democracy.
Well, I'll start by saying that we got our instructions from the British people to do this in the first place. But she does raise some very serious issues. I mean, firstly, yes, of course. My views on the importance of parliamentary accountability have not changed because I've moved 4 benches forward. And I still believe that we should be as open with Parliament as it is possible to be in a negotiation. I am, for example, appearing in front of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in a week or two's time, an undertaking I made some time ago. I'm doing the same with the House of Lords Committee on the same. As for the question of employment rights, I would say that a very large component of the people who voted to leave the European Union could be characterised as the British industrial working class. And it is no part of my brief to undermine their rights. Full stop.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State to his new role. I think he's absolutely right that we need to respect the result of the 23rd of June, and there's also right that people wanted further controls on immigration. They don't feel confidence in the immigration policy that we've had. But there seem to be 2 words missing from his statement. I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, and they're the words single market. And isn't it the heart of this matter we're going to be arguing about for the next few months and years, that balance between access to the single market and the freedom of movement of people to come to this country? When will the government set out its view on that fundamental point?
I'm afraid I start from a disagreement with the Right Honourable Lady. The simple truth is, as I did say earlier, that the negotiation over free trade with the European Union is something which will be to the benefit of both sides. It will be beneficial to us and beneficial to the European countries themselves. The question of immigration and control of immigration is a very high priority for this government, as the Prime Minister has made plain on many occasions. So I'm afraid I don't agree with the fundamental tenet of her question. I do not think that is a natural, necessary trade-off. I think the negotiation has got to be very much on what is in the mutual benefit of this country and the European Union. Full stop.
Al Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 45 Japanese companies operate in Wales, supporting some 6,000 jobs, mainly in tech manufacturing. Manufacturing itself is worth £9 billion to the Welsh economy. What assurances can the Secretary of State give to those workers and to those companies that Wales-Japan relations and the Welsh economy itself will not be harmed by Brexit?
Well, it's the same assurance I give to all manufacturing operations in the United Kingdom. The aim of this negotiation is to deliver the best trade opportunity that we possibly can. And that includes getting the best arrangement with the European market and also exploiting the best arrangements with other non-European markets. And I'll make a point to him on manufacturing alone that the quantity of exports that we make to the European Union is exceeded by the exports we make to those countries with whom we have no free trade agreement at all. So once we get a free trade agreement, or many of them, as my right honourable friend will do, but I shan't steal his thunder, as soon as we get those free trade agreements, we won't see downsides, we'll see opportunities.
Ah, yes, a most exotic delicacy in the House. Mr. Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on his long overdue return to ministerial office? In the 7 short weeks since he has been in office, alongside our new Foreign Secretary and our new Secretary of State for International Trade, we have seen a record increase in service industries growth, a record increase in manufacturing industry growth, a 3.3% increase in motor car sales, and we have also seen the Speaker of the US Congress, the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of New Zealand all pressing for free trade deals with this country, while the Deputy Chancellor of Germany has acknowledged that the EU-US trade deal is dead in the water. Does that not confirm that the 17 million people who voted to leave the European Union in this country know a darn sight more about economics than the members of the IMF, the OECD, the IFS, and all these other soi-disant experts who have oof on their face?
My right honourable friend is not known for understating his case, but I would point out it was 17.5 million people that made that judgment, and he's right. He's right. Much of the gloom and doom, the fear-mongering that went on before the referendum has been proven to be wrong. That being said, I would not be quite so unalloyed optimistic as he is, because of course we're in a world at which there are a lot of economic pressures going on. That's why the meetings in China are going on now. So I think that he makes his point brilliantly, as always, and I agree with the main thrust of it, but let's not get too optimistic before we close the deal.
Mr. Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State said he wants to have the supremacy of this Parliament. If we are a sovereign, supreme Parliament, why is this Parliament not going to have a decision as to when we trigger Article 50?
We did. It was called a referendum act, and it was passed by 6 to 1 in this Parliament.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all congratulate my right honourable friend on his complete and abysmal failure over a 10-year period to avoid high office. It's a great pleasure to see him in his place. May I also reassure him that as somebody who supported the Remain campaign, I see it as my absolute duty to support the government in giving effect to the public desire to leave the European Union, including supporting the government in its implementing of Article 50. My right honourable friend rightly pointed out that the matter is legally extremely complex. It also concerns, as he rightly said, the acquis communautaire, which is about the conferring of private legal rights on individuals in this country which have the force of statute. And I have to say to my right honourable friend that the idea that those should simply be revoked by our exit without parliamentary approval troubles me very much and appears to me to be an abdication of the responsibility of this House. Now, I accept that in many cases they've been created by Henry VIII clauses, which was the unsatisfactory nature of the EU. But actually what we will now do, if we cannot scrutinise them before Article 50 is invoked, is allowing the government to dispose of private property rights, including intellectual property as an example, by decree. And I have to say to him, that troubles me very much. And I'd ask him to use his ingenuity to find ways of resolving this particular dilemma.
Well, it's a pleasure to hear from my right honourable friend and long-term friend. But he's over-interpreting what I've said, I think, because Article 50 is the beginning of this process. It's not the end. And there will, I am sure, well, I know, there will be many opportunities for this House to scrutinise what we are about to do after Article 50 takes place. But of course, it's somewhat futile before we actually start the negotiation, because some of those negotiations will have direct impact on the very rights he's talking about. But he can take it from me. I didn't spend all those years on the backbenches defending those rights to give them up now.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that it would be a good idea to try and find some way of maintaining a form of cooperation on foreign policy after we leave the European Union? Because even after exit, we will still very much be part of Europe, and there are a great number of challenges around the world on which we will have to continue to work with our European neighbours.
The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. And the tradition of this country in maintaining strong, effective alliances, generally for good, in the world at large, is one that I fully expect will continue. Indeed, one aspect of the picture of the future that I see is that there will be, Britain will continue to be a good global citizen, as it always has been. And cooperation on foreign policy is very much a part of that.
Mrs. Cheryl Gillan.
May I add my congratulations to the others, to my right honourable friend. It's good to see him back in his natural habitat, the dispatch box. Businesses in the UK are not just concerned about access to the single market. They are concerned about other matters. And a unitary patent and the proposed new unitary patent court, a unified patent court, has been eagerly anticipated by businesses who currently have to, at great cost, apply for separate patents in separate countries. Now, the UK was due to ratify this later this year alongside Germany and one other country. Could my right honourable friend give business the undertaking that the UK will ratify this agreement before the end of this year, and who will continue to play a full part so British businesses benefit from being able to be part of a larger unified patent authority?
I'll say this to my right honourable friend, that for as long as we are a member of the European Union, which is going to be, by the sounds of it, at least 2 years, we will meet all our obligations and we will take our responsibilities extremely seriously, including the one she's outlined.
Can I just very gently ask the Secretary of State to face the House?
I beg the Speaker.
Sometimes his answers aren't fully heard. They're heard by the person at whom he's looking, but not by the House.
All I can do is plead inexperience.
If not you. Yes. Mr. Frank Field.
May I congratulate the Secretary of State for his return to the front bench, and may I thank him for the statement he's made on behalf of all those Labour constituencies that voted to leave, and in making the control of our borders the cornerstone of any renegotiations. But might I take him back to the question the right honourable gentleman, the member for Woking, asked? Given the huge trade surplus Europe has with us, how does he think that power position will play out when we're talking about membership of or access to the single market?
Well, it is early days to forecast the negotiation, but he's quite right. There is a large trade surplus. I mean, the one that was cited over and over again during the course of the referendum campaign, I don't want to revisit it, but was the surplus in cars from Germany alone, for example. And with the European Union facing economic difficulties, I don't think they're going to want to create problems for themselves in creating bilateral arrangements which hurt themselves. So the way I think it will play out is over the course of the period concerned, and as I say, probably a couple of years or so, people will start to focus on what their own national interest is. My experience of the European Union is that the Commission makes a great deal public statements, but at the end of the day, it's the national interest of the individual countries that actually decides the outcome.
Andrew Tidy.